I'd like to thank SETA for organizing this panel, and I also thank you all for coming here this afternoon. And my name is Mr. Özcan, and I will be moderating this panel. And as we all know, we are facing difficulties in our neighborhoods, both because of Syria and Ukraine. And today, just after the elections, there are several difficulties in Ukraine, and the conflict in Syria is continuing for more than 3 years. And there are some commentators who are establishing some similarities between the cases, or some people are also establishing some contacts and the response of countries towards these issues, towards these two cases. So we are here today to discuss how countries responded to these challenges, both to the case of Ukraine and Syria. And I will give each speaker 5 to 10 minutes to present their views about the response of their countries, and also in the case of Visegrád members in general to both to Ukraine and also to Syria. And after the panelists will speak 5 to 10 minutes, and we will allow you to ask some questions, and we will continue with Q&A. But before moving to the Visegrád countries, I will give the first floor to Ambassador Altay Cengiz'e to present Turkish view, both on the case of Syria and also on the case of Ukraine, because both of these issues are crucial importance for Turkey, and we will continue with our speakers. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Bey. I also would like to thank SETA for this organization. I'm much happy to see my Visegrád colleagues, both political directors, as I understand, I would like to welcome them in Ankara. From a policy planner's point of view, what we can say at this hour on 27th of May, with regard especially to the Ukraine crisis, the Crimean crisis, there was an election yesterday. This election was welcomed by, in general, the West, and also today we welcomed the way this election in Ukraine has been realized. Of course, this was a first step forward. The election and having a Ukrainian leader elected by the people is the first step. From then on, the reform or the restoration, however you wish to call, have to begin from now on. So it is an important date for us. Exactly, there has not been much voting going on in Donetsk and Luhansk. And as most, I think 12,000 votes has been used. So is that enough to taint the Ukrainian election? Not really. It's an abnormality, but it's not enough to taint the Ukrainian election. Then two other important things happened yesterday and the day before. On the 25th, just ahead of the Ukrainian vote, BP signed an agreement with Rosneft. Igor Sechin, of course, from the inner circle, so-called inner circle of Mr. Putin, was the CEO of Rosneft, and he was delighted with this agreement. Was that a volte-face for sanctions? I think it was, because after all, let alone the German and French attitudes, Italian attitudes, very much known, which really mimicked the Greek attitude towards sanctions to Russia. UK has been more active at the forefront, and then BP, historically, going back to the Darcy days in Persia, in Iran, early 20th century, etc. This BP has been somewhat intermingling with the British government, etc. So it is much telling that BP signed this big agreement with regard to oil petroleum search in North Pole. That's another thing. Then, the day before, of course, the Russian-Chinese agreement. It's indeed a very strategic move, because the agreement was not signed only between Gazprom and CNPC, but also between the two governments. And indeed, now we have seen the Chinese signing aside at the United Nations Security Council in the ICC, International Criminal Court, whereas everyone expected them to abstain as they did before, as indeed they abstained in the Crimean vote. So this is another gain for Russia. So I am speaking, of course, from a policy planner's point of view and in very general terms. I am not saying that in the long run Russia will be content with what he chooses to do in Crimea. It will take a long time for the West to forgive, in inverted commas, what Russia did, whatever their explanations might be. It will be a long time that Russia will be forgiven. However, in the very early hours of this crisis, we have to see that Russia, contrary to what Mr. Obama said, having been stuck in the 19th century mentality, in the Cold War mentality, it is not, it doesn't seem to be, because we have seen a very successful diplomacy being played by Russia, almost an avant-garde diplomacy, bringing in their very powerful connections with international companies. BMW's CEO was saying that they need Russia, etc. And then we now have the example of BP. They have been successfully spinning somewhat the media, promoting the image of Russia as a great power. At the ministry, we went into the Russian websites try to understand how Mr. Putin is presenting this Crimean annexation to his own audience. And it's evident that he was very much using imperial terminology. The annexation itself could have been a result of several factors. It seems to be a composite decision. Certainly, there was no definite need for the protection of Russian nationals living in Ukraine. The real reason seems to be that Russia became afraid suddenly. By the way, power changed hands in Ukraine, and Mr. Yanukovych had to leave the country. They became very much suspicious that suddenly Ukraine can be put into road towards EU, if not NATO right away, but certainly with EU. And of course, given the Eurasian Economic Union, it's a pet subject and a very much strategic design of Russia. Any signing of an association agreement with the European Union would have been cut the Eurasian Economic Union project. Without Ukraine, there was no chance for the Eurasian Union to work. So, and that was also the factor of the Black Sea Fleet. I think the way leadership had changed hands in Ukraine prompted Russia to act suddenly, and there is no need now to delve into the tactics they used, but the main reason seems to be strategic. Now, from Turkey's point of view, I can assure you that if ever there will be a tangible, a mainstream Western position, we'll be there. But the Western position does not seem to arrive. At any rate, we believe that Mr. Davutoglu is right now, as you know, in Moscow, and Ukraine, Syria, all such subjects are being taken with Mr. Lavrov, his counterpart. We have no doubts about the need to engage in Russia. Then we cannot be expected to be not to worry about, given their historical experience, not to worry about the 300,000 Crimean Turks. Interestingly, Mr. Putin, in his speech on the 18th of March, used this term rather than Crimean Tatars. He said Crimean Turks. Whatever, there have been lots of soft power promises being made to the Crimean Tatars. But we'll have to see. If it is to Mr. Alexianov, none of them will work. And Mr. Grimold has already been banned from entry to Crimea. These are not much promising developments. So in very general terms, I need to limit my 10 minutes. Of course, I have to eat that. But in very general terms, this is how we see Ukraine. It's an evolving situation. There should be a Western response. There will be numerous implications. You can take what will happen in South China Sea, for instance. The way a big power acts is an example for others to follow. So we must be very careful about that. The need to reinstate international norms is very urgent. And then there are other urgent humanitarian problems. With regard to Syria, the problem is very evident. Assad thinks that after all such bloodshed, he is a suitable candidate to head Syria. This is almost unbelievable from a sane person's point of view. If any leader who caused almost 3 million refugees, Syrian refugees in Turkey, it's almost now 1 million, then in Jordan and Lebanon, he is a leader which caused that, and at least 150,000 people got killed, women and children. Then, of course, there is the blatant use of chemical weapons, and he thinks he can be elected. And he will be elected because it will be a sham election. Unfortunately, again, in very general terms, the West did not give, it was not exemplary. Mr. Obama's red line was the use of chemical weapons. Chemical weapons had been used by the regime in Syria, nothing happened. And both, if we have to compare the Syrian and Ukraine crisis, at least two things stick out. I think there has been much waver in the West in both instances. People fail to see a tangible, definite Western approach in both cases. Then secondly, the division within the European Union has become very stark. My colleagues here know quite well the reasons for German reticence, French who want to sell that aircraft carrier to Russia. So as long as economy trumps basic strategic interests, it would not augur well for the future. We have to be careful in how Turkey's contribution to both crises, which will be seen that it will be crucial in time. Within a year, Turkey's input, both in Syria and in the Ukraine crisis, will be crucial because it's obvious it's not only geography, but it's also about our historic ties to both countries. We have to be sane, we have to be very careful, we have to understand that we can be much more helpful than people generally suppose, but for that we have to see a Western position emerging. So let me stop here. This is just I want to just a general through the horizon kind of thing. So we will answer questions.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Cengizer. Excellency, Cengizer provided us a picture from a Turkish perspective, and he already figured out differences between cases, and at the same time also similarities. In that respect, he pointed out two important issues: the inconsistencies in the policies of the West, at the same time the division within the EU regarding the split in Ukraine and also Syria. Now, I will move to our friends from Visegrád countries, and I will first begin with Hungary. His Excellency Mr. Szabolcs Takats. I hope it was not that bad. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, first of all, to everyone, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to this event today afternoon. Thanks for SETA for organizing this event. I was given the floor first, not because Hungary is the most important member of the Visegrád Forum, but Hungary is the current presidency. And before going into the discussion of the two crises, Syria and Ukraine, if I may just use the opportunity to also give you an insight into Visegrád. Who are we and why are we important? Are we important or not? So this is a privilege for us to be in Ankara today, and it fits into very much to the foreign political aspirations and thinking of our governments and our leaders. First of all, the name Visegrád comes from a historic castle in my country, Hungary, where leaders of the countries centuries ago met first to approximate our views and bring us closer politically and economically. Now, so it's a historical, several hundreds of years of cooperation. The value of it really lies in the fact that after the political changes in our countries 25 years ago, this year, 2014, we are celebrating 25th anniversary of our countries becoming free and independent sovereign, independent of foreign rule after the collapse of the Soviet system. Very iconic leaders of the time decided to revive Visegrád, and the original idea was that our countries with very similar historical experiences, similar political and other challenges, economic, social challenges, we can be more successful in our aspirations to join the Euro-Atlantic integration schemes, the European Union and NATO together. Again, this is an anniversary year. We are celebrating the 10th anniversary of our European Union membership and 15th and 10th anniversary of our NATO membership. And of course, in NATO, we are also allies to Turkey. We are not EU members with Turkey, but we all support the European Union aspirations of Turkey. And this is also one of the reasons why we are here. Having established this original goal of integration with Europe and the security lines of NATO, the subsequent governments in our countries decided that we should carry on with this cooperation. And value also lies in the fact that there have been changes of governments, different political ideas sometimes, but Visegrád did not. And there's a viability of Visegrád. And our goal as political directors of our foreign ministries is to promote Visegrád globally. With some our partner countries like Japan or the United States, we managed to establish an annual-based dialogue for the last couple of years in one of the capitals. And now we are trying to extend our wings and address countries which are close to us, which are our allies, our friends, and with which we are seeking very similarly on different issues. That's why we have come here to Ankara, but this meeting was preceded by a higher level encounter of our leaders when Foreign Minister Davos paid a visit to Hungary during our presidency at the end of October last year. He met the foreign ministers of Visegrád. They agreed that we should identify some areas of political, economic, social cooperation where we can be benefit to the other and we can be added value. Now, our goal is to be an exhibit of that. We would like to really become a real brand, and as you know, and you are very much aware of the Scandinavian route, for example, the Benelux bloc route within the European Union. We would also like to present ourselves as full-fledged members of the EU, and we can say that we are new members. 10 years now that passed. We are full-fledged members of the European Union. policy in Brussels. Now, talking a little bit about these two crises, Syria and Ukraine, the question was that we should compare the two and what are the similarities and what are the implications of one crisis on the other. I think there are many. There are several implications, as we have also heard.
And also from a neighboring perspective, and also having big historical ties with the region.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one similarity is that the two crises are happening in even a neighborhood. Syria is a neighbor of Turkey, while Ukraine is a neighbor of us. And when we are a responsible member of the European Union, we also have a responsibility to be an added value and to have a real influence on important political and other decisions made in Brussels. If you look around the world, what we can experience is there are several crises, too many crises. It's not only Syria and Ukraine, but Libya, Mali, Republic Centrafrique, South Sudan, and many crises, political crisis, humanitarian crisis. The international community needs to respond, and the responsible members of the international community has to take their own shares. I think it's just a legitimate demand that countries in a given region should primarily tackle their own problems. And when we are talking about the Eastern Partnership policy of the European Union, then I think we in Central Europe has maybe an even higher role to play than some other countries in our European family, which are engaged and involved to tackling other crises in the southern neighborhood of the European Union, in North Africa and beyond. If there is any positive impact of the Ukrainian crisis in our reading is that it raised the visibility of our group, Visegrád, and we have certainly come to Turkey to talk to leaders here on the crisis in Ukraine, on the crisis in Syria, on our cooperation in NATO, on the situation in the Western Balkan countries, which is a political term, of course. The Western Balkans, I mean. Western Balkans is another neighborhood, an imminent neighborhood to Visegrád. Hungary is the southernmost country. And of course we have a role to play and we have a responsibility to take. And we are very much interested in the ideas articulated by the leaders of Turkey. So that's Visegrád, and I'm very pleased that now we can present it to you. Please take the word that there is something like Visegrád, and we would like to make it a brand. It's not a formal integration. Of course, we are members of the EU. It's a sub-region. It's a very loose, not informal type of cooperation, but at a very high level, at a high frequency. Our prime ministers meet from time to time. Our different ministers meet, and they articulate the views together. And if you look at just the crisis in Ukraine, how many statements the Visegrád leaders issued. And it might be the case that our opinions are not 100% identical on each and every small element of a crisis, or the detail of the crisis. But what is important is that the basic messages and the basic lines are identical. So we see the crisis similar. Of course, we accentuate this element of that, but there is a Visegrád diplomacy and there is a Visegrád opinion. And this is the reason why we have come here. Let me give the floor to my colleagues and then get back to Ukraine and Syria with some additional ideas.
Thank you. As a good diplomat, you escaped some difficult issues, but I believe that there will be some questions during the Q&A session. Thank you very much for your views, especially you also provided us a picture about what is Visegrád, what are the countries doing together. And now we will move to His Excellency Mr. Lubomir Rehab.
Thank you. Good. Thank you for coming. Visegrád has a rotating presidency, as my colleague already said, and it always changes for 1 year period in July. From 1st of July, Slovakia takes the presidency from Hungary with a motto for this presidency, dynamic Visegrád for Europe and world. Why for Europe and why for world? Because the principal aim of Visegrád cooperation is to make our nations closer and to help them in European surrounding. And we have V4+ cooperation for cooperating with third partners, very successful as it was already said. The main priorities for Visegrád presidency are competitiveness of our nations, cohesion, innovation, and others. Visegrád doesn't have any institution. What is important? Only one, and this International Visegrád Fund, which has a seat in Bratislava, rotating directors, and it covers development aid to third countries, but also facilitates the exchanges within Visegrád countries, all kinds of cooperation. So this is a very important instrument, and we are starting cooperation also with TICA, Director of Visegrád Fund. Karla Bursterova is together with us in Turkey, having her own meetings. Now coming back to the main issue of today's meeting.
Cannot escape.
Yeah, I'd like to elaborate a little bit on similarities, even if I think that there are more differences on these two cases. Why? First of all, I think that there are different grounds in both crises. In Syria, it was, simply speaking, an attempt to resolve by force the sectarian disparity in state when Alawite dominancy hampered the rights of Sunnis and other nationalities unsuccessfully. In Ukraine, it was mainly frustration from the corrupted government. It started when President Yanukovych in November met Russian President Putin, and afterwards he refused to sign an association agreement with the European Union, on which both sides were working for 5 years. And the aim of this association was to unify the legal norms in Ukraine with legal norms of the European Union. That brings more transparency, more order to the country. President Yanukovych got $3 billion for remuneration, but anyway, he was forced to escape and to emigrate to Russian Federation. They are also different on a level of humanitarian effects of the crisis. In Syria, we see millions of refugees. We see 150,000 of killed people, huge devastation of the country, which is a really terrible humanitarian situation. And we, as members of the European Union, are also contributing to relief of the people there. In Ukraine, every victim is regrettable, but the numbers were absolutely different in numbers. There is also difference in political reality in Syria and in Ukraine, because in Syria we still have in government controlled space centristic system with no real opposition in parliament, no offer or alternative. While in Ukraine we have legitimate parliament elected in normal elections. We have government perspective in Syria, there is mainly a very pessimistic forecast, a deadlock situation. We saw it in Geneva conference that there was no agreement at all, any possibility to find mutually agreeable solution. While in Ukraine, again, after presidential elections of yesterday and promising Russian statements on these elections, there is a light in the tunnel that the situation will be normalized. Now, briefly, what common features of both conflicts can be seen. First of all, it is spillover effect, unfortunately, to the region. And we see it in neighboring countries of Syria, and we see very negative consequences of Ukrainian crisis and the way how Russian Federation explained the international law when occupied the territory of Crimea that can be detrimental to world order. Second problem is the massive involvement of external actors. In Syria, it was huge financial and military support from many countries. There are plenty of foreign fighters linked to terrorist groups, direct military involvement of Hezbollah movement. So there are really many external actors influencing this conflict and fostering it. And the similar situation is seen in Ukraine, where we see the direct military action of Russian Federation on Ukrainians, so in Crimea up to its occupation and joining to the Russian Federation, and also supposed Russian fighters and supporters in southeastern Ukraine inciting separatism of local inhabitants. What is new phenomenon in this crisis, in my opinion, is the use of non-conventional means in war. It means that never before we were witnessing the using of these green men, unidentified soldiers, without identification who they are, and also massive propaganda, really brainwashing, describing the government in Kiev as military junta. There's no junta at all, that they are fascists that will expel Russian-speaking population from the territory. Generally, this concept of protecting of Russian-speaking people can be very detrimental to international relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berg. You provided us a picture with differences and similarities, but you also pointed out many differences, and you figured out also new actors like non-conventional actors, tools, and massive propaganda in the case of Ukraine. Now, without any delay, we are moving to Mr. Batla Tali.
For the floor, and many thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. I do believe that the value of this debate is in our interaction, therefore I'll try to limit myself and I'll skip the history of the Visegrád group. Let me follow on where Lubomir has finished, where are the similarities he has mentioned, the differences between those two crises, and I do entirely agree with him. Few similarities I do see are following. First of all, the inability of the international community, of the UN system, to react on both crises in a decisive way. Therefore, we had to find additional tools and ways how to really counteract vis-à-vis those crises which were unfolding. Another similarity I do see is that crises are happening in our immediate neighborhood, and they are influencing us directly or indirectly, and the spillover effect has been mentioned as well. Russia is implied in both crises, directly in Ukraine, indirectly maybe in Syria, but Russia is proving to be an important player in both crises. That's as far as the similarities are concerned. Where I do see the differences, the main difference I do see is the EU's position. I was witnessing the Syrian crisis since the very beginning in the EU. I was following all those debates, and my impression is that our inability to act was mainly related with the fact that there was a lack of common analysis of what is really happening, what is the real tool with which we should react to the crisis. There are clear differences. The EU has split at the very beginning. We were discussing arms embargo, we were discussing other sanctions, but the very common analysis was missing since the very beginning. So we were in the end able to react to the humanitarian crisis. The Commission proved to be pretty useful in that context. We were able to somehow address the consequences. We were able to support the wider international community in trying to find a solution to the crisis, but we were not the key decision-making element in the whole process. And I'm afraid that the EU is not well positioned in today to tackle the crisis in Syria. Well, I could only add the question who is really, because it seems to me that everybody is struggling with the crisis and nobody knows what to do and how to end the difficulties we are facing on the ground. Everybody is able to agree probably that the only political solution to the crisis is a viable solution, but what does it mean in the real times? That's another question. As for the Ukraine, I was quite impressed by the way the EU was sticking together, how we were able, since the very beginning, to have a common analysis, how we were able to react on what was happening in Crimea, what was happening in the eastern Ukraine, and how we were able also to adopt our policies. We were reacting decisively in a measured way, and we were able to communicate our decision-making to our own population, but to the wider world as well. So that is the main difference I do see, and I'd like to really engage further on in the debate we will have later on.
Thank you very much for this short remarks, Mr. Vali. You pointed out the inability of the international system in terms of answering the difficulties of each case at the same time the civilian effect of this crisis, and you also pointed out the role of Russia in both cases, whether direct or indirect. So we will have the chance to discuss these issues and more in the Q&A session. And our last speaker is my friend Piotr Krawczyk from Polish Embassy. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the Hungarian presidency for organizing this very timely event. It's not by accident that we are meeting here in Turkey, because Turkey is becoming more and more important partner for different countries. And as was mentioned before, there were already other high-ranking meetings before and Turkey. And while it was mentioned before that before is not a formal organization, it's not an organization that has some secretariat, other let's say instruments, but already this organization has before fund. We are also preparing for starting the battle group, the EU battle group. We are cooperating very closely on energy and a number of other issues. forces and Syria, and of course I'm in a very difficult situation because I'm the last one to talk and there's not much to be said, so I have to reformulate my speech while the other colleagues were saying. But let me just tell you that there might be differences between those two crises are mostly in the source and the conduct of those two crises. But when it comes to the outcome and the results, I think that in this area we should be looking for similarities. Because those two crises, Syria, which was a part of the Arab Spring, and now the Ukrainian crisis, are showing us that this is the end of the history. So the dream we were dreaming for the last 25 years after the fall of the communism is over, and we woke up in a reality where all issues like NATO, Western transatlantic cooperation, EU, security, energy are relevant again. So we woke up to the new reality when those old instruments of geopolitics are working again, and we have to find ourselves in those two, in these new realities, as EU, as NATO, and also as a Visegrád. And I think that those two crises are pushing us to find new answers for those, let's say, classical questions, classical challenges. When you look, for example, at NATO, only a couple of years ago, everybody was saying, okay, we are leaving the NATO, we are leaving Afghanistan at the end of 2014, so NATO might not be relevant anymore after 2014. But now, suddenly, we see that NATO is becoming more and more relevant. We have to reformulate NATO again. We are looking for a new shape for NATO. Again, we are talking about Article number 5. We are talking about the accession process. We are talking about the upcoming Newport summit. So NATO is becoming relevant again. The same thing with transatlantic relationship as a whole. Of course, NATO is a part of it, but now look at TTIP negotiations. They are becoming more and more relevant. When the TTIP negotiations started, everybody expected that it would be lagging, that it would be going very slow, but suddenly we saw that TTIP negotiations are becoming more and more important for all of us, and both United States and European Union are putting more emphasis on concluding the TTIP negotiation because of the, of course, energy, because of the threats from outside. Of course, I mentioned energy, and maybe Syria is not that important in this regard, but especially the Ukraine crisis and the Russian crisis, they are showing us that the energy is a geopolitical instrument that is used by some players in this geopolitical game, and we cannot avoid it. So we have to face it, and this is another challenge. Let's say an old challenge that is repacked and put in front of us, and we have to face it. And of course, European Union. Of course, everybody here will agree that the European Union is probably the worst organization created ever, but show me a better. Just like with democracy. We do not agree with each other. We have a lot of problems. We went through a number of crises, and even before the countries from Central Europe, the post-communist countries joined the European Union, European Union went from one crisis to the other. So this is, let's say, a constant for the European Union, and I do not expect that anything will change in this respect till the end of existence of this organization. But again, Syria and the Ukrainian crisis show the relevance of the EU, show the relevance of the expansion, show the relevance of the neighborhood policy, show the relevance of the common foreign and security policy. So once again, we are talking about issues that are important for us as Europeans. And since the European crisis, I mean the financial crisis, weakened to a certain extent weakened the European Union. Now the challenges outside of the European Union are bringing Europeans again. Of course, it is not that simple, because also the challenges outside are creating a lot of rifts between countries inside of the European Union. But in fact, those challenges from outside are pushing us to the other level. Let me just make a remark that now with the new parliament, with the new elections, we are facing a very hot debate on the common foreign and security policy of the European Union. And now, because the head of the president of the EU Commission might be elected in the let's say elections as a consequence of elections, and we will have a new high representative. Those things are showing that EU is moving toward the new goal. So what I want to say is that we, as a Visegrád group, we are facing a very similar challenges, and we disagree on many issues. But on the other hand, we see that that playing together and responding together is much more profitable than just staying apart and playing separately, because the world is changing. We are not big enough to do it by our own. So it's one mission, one team, and I think that the next years, I mean the years to come, will bring even closer cooperation between the Visegrád, because the challenges will be growing probably, and it will also bring us closer together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. To provide us the picture by touching upon the international global aspect of the issues, the crisis, at the same time the role of the United Nations and EU, NATO and other international organizations, and the implications of these issues for the future regional and international gatherings. Now we finished the presentations on time, I think. Now we will have some time for Q&A session. And if you have any questions regarding these issues, the Syrian issue, the conflict in Ukraine, just having the elections yesterday at the same time, having elections in European Parliament. So the floor is yours for your questions, if there is any.
Iraqi Koplatadze, Ambassador of Georgia in the Republic of Turkey. Thank you very much, dear guests, for your excellent and very informative, short but brilliant presentation, as they say, regarding the crisis in Ukraine and Syria. You've touched upon many interesting issues, and let me now raise a question in line with what you said. You mentioned that you're becoming an important player as a group.
To whom you are directing your question? To whom you are directing?
Well, I'm to the representative of Hungary, first of all, and if somebody may wish to add, of course, I would be happy to hear. You mentioned that during the last 15 years, since you're celebrating 15 years since you became NATO member, 10th anniversary of EU member. From this perspective, what's going on in Ukraine right now, how do you see the European perspective of the same Ukraine or Eastern Partnership countries? As you know, just after 1 month, there's scheduled signing of association agreement with Ukraine, already signed political part, but signing of association agreement with Moldova and Georgia. And how, in this line, how do you see the perspectives of a NATO aspiration of aspirant countries in line with changes, what's going on? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Just kidding.
Difficult questions. First of all, if you are talking about the crisis in Ukraine and Syria, which is supposed to be the topic of this discussion today, I think the issue of legitimacy cannot be avoided. Who is legitimate, who is not legitimate? After all, this is where the problem started in Ukraine. For many months and years, in fact, the that time Ukrainian leadership, President Yanukovych, was negotiating with the European Union and showed a clear interest that he would like to sign the association agreement, and as part of it, a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. Now, it's BCFTA, as we all refer to it. It's not a simple trade agreement where we are talking about non-tariff barriers and trade, but we are talking about the legal system as well, taking over the whole acquis of the European Union, including transparency, corruption, all these issues that they need to be dealing with. Now, when he decided not to sign the agreement, a remarkable element of the Ukrainian society decided that they would like to express their voice and their disagreement with that. And as a matter of fact, it emerged to be the Maidan, emerged to be a revolt, a public unrest. Because what has not been really addressed in Ukraine for many, many years is the genuine will of the people. So, Mr. Yanukovych, in a way, lost his legitimacy because a large number of the society in Ukraine simply did not consider him to be a credible and legitimate leader of the country. Now, legally, of course, it's a very difficult issue. He was an elected president, and even when three foreign ministers, including the foreign minister of Poland and France and Germany, paid a visit to Kiev, and on the just so to say the backwaters of this emerging social and political crisis, they tried to find a political solution. They signed an agreement, but the president left and did not comply with with his obligations that he committed himself to in this agreement. Now, of course, the Russian Federation still, for a long time, since November, has been communicating that they are not ready to get engaged with any political representative in Ukraine because the legitimate president was Yanukovych. That's why this election 2 days ago was very important. That there was an election in Ukraine, and although in some parts of the country it could not be held, but as my colleague Mr. Raak also referred to it, the initial responses from Moscow are promising because they say that now they are ready to get engaged in a political discussion with elected and legitimate leader of Ukraine. Now, in Syria, I think it's somewhat different because the current president, Assad, wants to strengthen his rule by holding elections only in some part of the country, apparently. But it cannot be held in the whole territory of Syria as there is a civil war going on, as huge devastation. So his legitimacy will be certainly viewed from a different perspective. And in a way, the new president of Ukraine can be a responsible member of the international community, and he will be accepted as a representative of Ukraine by the international community. And also a country's ability, or a leader's ability, the government's or president's ability to get engaged internationally is also a form of legitimacy. I very strongly doubt that whatever the outcome of the Syrian elections in early June will be, Mr. Assad will be accepted as a legitimate representative of Syria. Some countries will accept him maybe, but it's only a very limited number of countries. I think it was only 11 of the 197 in the Union which voted in favor of him at the election. But responding to your question about Eastern Partnership policy and NATO, just today we discussed that for us, NATO is basically the single most important organization to belong to. Although the value of it, we has not, of course, political leaders have always seen the value of being a NATO member, but our societies for the last 20 years got used to a situation where there is peace, there is stability, and nothing is threatening the peace. Now, the biggest shock of this Ukrainian crisis was that, again, the possibility of an armed conflict in the even the neighborhood of Europe, or in Europe, in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, has become a very close reality. And that's exactly what showed the importance of our countries belonging to NATO. If I put up the question theoretically, what would have happened if the Baltic states, or Poland, or Hungary, or Slovakia, Czech Republic were not NATO members now? How far have we gone, or could have we gone in this conflict? For us, security is key, because if people feel safe and international partners know that this is a safe country where they can invest, where they can get engaged politically, economically, this will bring economic growth, this will bring social development, and this will stabilize the region. That's why our countries are supportive to the membership of Georgia and other Balkan countries to NATO. We believe that this story is not finished. And what is important, it's a question of principle, this is not us who has to tell it. It's basically the people of these countries who need to decide whether they would like to join the European Union or NATO. And if there's a democratic government, then this government will presumably listen to the voice of the people. But at the same time, we also have to be realistic and not idealistic. We have to be aware about the interest of the Russian Federation, which should be a very important partner for us. Now we are not talking about partnership with Russia, because Russia has shown some very assertive teeth. But we would like to go back to Russia as a partner, an economic partner, and initial remarks you mentioned about the BP signing an agreement with Russia. I think this is not a problem that we are engaged economically with Russia. The problem is that Russia started to question the architecture of the international relations that we all live in. So, just
before moving to other questions, Ambassador James, please.
You might have read, I think, James F. Matlock. It was the autopsy of an empire. He was, the ambassador of the implosion of the Soviet Union. He relates his very first encounter with Mr. Shevardnadze, and Mr. Shevardnadze called and he asks what the United States can do for Georgia. And it's a very straight answer. The best thing you can do, is of course to take in Turkey into the European Union. That will be the chess mat, and everything will change. So this didn't happen for various reasons. Then I agree with the ambassador that the membership of Georgia to Western institutions, NATO and Europe, is not a foregone conclusion. It is not finished. This has become a Go game, not a chess game. In chess, you knock down one of your opponents, but in the Go, you gain spaces. Now, Russia and China has turned this into a Go game rather than a chess game. It's more long-term now. With the crisis in Ukraine, at least two hopes were dashed. First, it was hoped that someday Russia will align itself, will take its place against China with the West. This is not going to happen. The second hope, which was dashed also, that Russia will be able to reform itself from within. It is not going to happen because Mr. Putin, after 2012, chose to vertical authority. And there is a lack of understanding in Russia that democracy is an organic process. It has to start at the grassroots, and it has to answer. And the idea of a loyal opposition, for instance, does not exist in Russian understanding. So what this brings us to? Concomitantly, when those hopes were dashed, two beliefs re-arrived. Firstly, that if Russia cannot become part of the solution, it will be against any solution. Secondly, that there is a mutual dependence in energy questions. There is no longer a mutual dependence, given the $400 billion agreement with China. So, if Russia really goes to play this goal game, then I think the Western moral high grounds will be there to having Georgia, and Ukraine is a different case. But it all depends within the midterm how Russia will choose to play. And one more thing, of course you can engage with Russia in economic terms, but if you have only 17 persons in the so-called sanctions, and one of them is Mr. Igor Sechin, and the landmark, trademark Western company BP at the St. Petersburg Economic Summit signs a very multifaceted agreement, then something else. Nobody is against economic trade and all that with Russia. This has been done before. But at a time when we are trying to impose sanctions, BP goes and boycotted by all US companies. So I'm a bit afraid about how we are going to hold Western fault as such. So I just wanted to make that correction, if you allow me as well.
And also, Mr. Black.
Yes, thank you. For your answer on NATO, it's condition-driven process. And we have opened the policy, and definitely when we sign in September, we will see about enlargement processes. But as I know, Ukraine is not the main question. And on European perspective, I think that we need to understand that this is not the process designed to destroy relationship of common neighborhood with the Russian Federation, their relationship with Russian Federation, not at all. This is the aim of association processes is to make these states modern and developed. Only in such a condition they can be really independent and not to be victims of neocolonialism. Thanks.
Mr. Malik, and then.
Influence the companies like BP, for example. The problem is that we are value-based systems. We are based on market economies, and we do not simply try to influence our companies from the political perspective. That's the problem. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, we are not in the United States, but there might be a beauty of what you've just described, the US approach, the extraterritoriality of their sanctions. Because at some point it might be the BP's decision actually to focus rather on the US market than to deal with Russia. But again, given the development which we faced in Europe in the past and the legal basis we are having in Europe, it's quite tricky for us to try to really play the role and influence our companies from the political point of view. The other issue, I just wanted to say that there are not just mutual dependencies as far as the energy is concerned with Russia, because we are dependent on their energy, but they are dependent on our money as well. It's not the only thing we are having with Russia. For example, a lot of technologies. China cannot compete with with us on that. They are maybe looking towards China these days, but they are very much dependent on our patents, on our high-tech gadgets, and so on and so on. So that is something which needs to be kept in mind as well. Financial markets. We see the outflow of the finances from Russia, not because of the fact that we are telling our banks to withdraw money from Russia. No, financial markets are reacting independently. They are just reacting to what is happening vis-à-vis the torture system, vis-à-vis the position of Russia on many other issues, not just Ukraine. Because they do have doubts, they are safe in dealings with Russia.
So the question of the Georgian ambassador, just mentioned that a year ago, the debate about the NATO enlargement was rather sluggish, and there was not much debate about expanding NATO or granting new maps. And now, this debate is very heated. We are talking about the NATO expansion. We are talking about granting that to Georgia. Of course, it is not done deal. We will see how it will end up at the Newport site. And I would like to follow on what our Czech colleague just mentioned. Let me just give you what our Turkish colleague also mentioned. Let me just give you the couple of numbers. The contract that was signed between China and Russia is $400 billion. Just to start the exploration of the gas fields, Russia needs more than $60 billion. And as our Czech colleagues mentioned, Russia doesn't have technologies. They do not have money. Their financial resources are very much limited. So they need Western banks to give them the money to export gas to China. And then, taking all those things into account, plus technology costs, money costs, the borrowing of money costs, then there is a question, what is the price formula for this agreement? Because we might end up in this situation, I mean the Russians might end up in this situation when the exploration of this gas will be more expensive than the selling of this gas. So they will be losing money on the Chinese deal. If you take into account the shale gas from the United States, Canada, Australia, and a couple of others, we might end up in a situation where the profit margin will be very, very small, or it will be zero or minus. So this is a problem with this deal. We don't know exactly what's inside of this deal, but we might expect that the Chinese are not, and the Chinese are using the opportunity, that the Chinese realize what's going on, and they know that this deal was very important, not economically, but politically for Russia. So I'm quite sure that they took advantage. Of course, now it's a gamble for both sides. How the situation will evolve in the future. And the problem with Russia is that we won't engage Russia, because EU-Russian partnership is almost ideal. I mean, they have resources, they have oil, they have gas, and we have technologies, we have know-how, and we have banks, we have finances. But the problem with Russia is that they are refusing this ideal partnership to exist peacefully and go ahead in this particular moment. So it's up to the Russians to choose the right way and make this partnership.
Okay.
Just
one last thing.
I don't want to have the last word on this, but I have to clarify. I'm talking about, again, the timing. When the United States calls its companies and other Western companies not to attend St. Petersburg Economic Summit, there is something that of course, what you talk all about are the advantages of Europe, but they secede from the game. They just don't want to play the game. From a real politician's point of view, I have to say that if the case is that as you tell, it really doesn't matter, then why was Mr. Putin was smiling? Why was he very happy about the BP agreement and all that? Coming back to Russian predicaments, they've been solved. China is giving $25 billion right away. It will start in 2018. And again, in a longer term perspective, this is a perfect chess mat. They finished. We have to be realists on that.
Okay.
And the discrepancy of technological prowess will soon be ending as well. You know how Chinese are very much adept nowadays. I don't want to be pessimistic, but these are the aspects, really.
In a very fruitful way. So since we are in a think tank, so we have different views and we have different points of view. Any other questions? Okay, please, Ambassador.
I have some remarks, questions. First, if we are talking about the lost hope of aligning Russia with the West, who's responsible of that? Is it always Russia? Or Europe failed to provide new leaders after the fall of the communism, able to talk to Russia? We studied always that Russia was part of Europe. It seems like it's not anymore. Then we should really ask ourselves, who is responsible of that? And who is responsible of putting again the relevance of NATO, when NATO, according to what we knew in the 90s, should have stopped where it were, not reached to the doors of Moscow. Another question concerning the red line of Obama. You think Obama didn't see it because he was not wearing his glasses, or because the red line was not there or was somewhere else? Is it really so illegal to use those weapons and legal to use depleted uranium? Then the red line is not so clear that we should think again, because this was my opinion during that red line issue. Why Obama did not see the red line? Is it true that the government used what you call it, poison gas, or I don't know what, chemical weapons, or somebody else did also? We don't want to check well into that. If we check well, we may find something else. And that's why I come to the side of Obama. I think he couldn't see well the red line. We wanted him to see it, but he couldn't see it. Another question concerning, we always speak about the inability of the UN to react. Okay, these times, 2 times, Ukrainian crisis, Syrian crisis, did they react well during the Lebanese and Palestinian issues? I don't know. Now, another question for the EU members. When 1 or 2 or 3 EU members make crisis, why all the EU members should be part of it after? Because the involvement of all the EU members in Syria was not in the beginning. It's now that they are finding a way to be involved to find solutions. But before, I don't see that all EU members were part of the policies made in Syria or in Ukraine. Maybe I was wrong, or maybe I am wrong, but I am asking these questions. I think it's enough for the moment.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Too many questions. And one last question from you. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, one more. Then you will.
In fact, I have 2 questions.
Okay. Go ahead.
Cyprian Kozera, National Defense University Warsaw. At first, isn't it that simple that the crisis in Ukraine is caused by the lack of response to Syrian crisis? And the second question I would like to address to His Excellency, Representative of Turkey. If finally Assad is overthrown, and as we know right now, Kurdish are somehow allied to Assad. If Assad is overthrown, and Kurdish people declare independence in their free enclave in northern Syria or in the region of northern Syria, what would be the Turkish response? Thank you.
And the last question.
I just wanted to know that given, taking into account the most recent... Oh, introduce myself. Yes, sorry. I'm holding a laptop, I can't really stand up. My name is Karolina Deniska, and I am a student at the University of Toronto doing my internship here at SETA. And I wanted to know what your opinions were, given the results of the most recent EU election, if you could foresee that the new makeup of the EU Parliament would change the way that the EU approaches either of these two crises that we're talking about today.
Thank you. Now, we have 15 minutes to answer all of these tough questions. 5 minutes? Okay, since I'm the moderator, I will do it in my own way, okay? Okay.
Just very briefly, to answer a further question that why are we more taking part in the solution when we're not part of creating the problem? Well, that's the European Union we belong, and that's a family that needs to show solidarity, and that's exactly what now we are asking member states, that whatever response we give to the crisis in Ukraine, which more directly affects Europe than the crisis in Syria, the crisis in Ukraine affects almost all EU member countries, because almost all are engaged, one way or the other, with in cooperation with Russia. So the response should be based on the principles of solidarity and burden sharing. Now the lack of response in Syria, yeah, I think you are right. Just very briefly, because we don't have time, major powers in the world should also take into account their responsibility, that there will be consequences if they react, and there will be consequences if they do not react. So this is what they have to consider. The last question on the EU elections. Well, there will be a new new leaders in Europe, somewhat different than the others, and it might have an impact on the Europe's response to both crises. As a matter of fact, now it's an opportunity for us as well, our countries, to influence, depending on the representation of our governments and political parties in the new European Parliament.
Okay.
Just on continuing this idea, don't have a crystal ball and see how the Parliament will react, but the majority of elected deputies are from traditional family of political parties. So we can presume that the European Parliament will continue to act responsibly.
Whether the European leaders have been far-sighted, the Russia problem as such could have been managed much better. And of course, it is well known that the Russian population almost hates Gorbachev and Yeltsin for having given unnecessary concessions to the West, concessions which should not have been made in the first place. And this perception of NATO as a hostile alliance, of course, plays into the hands of authoritarianism in Russia. But they could have been much more far-sighted in dealing with Russia. Of course, this is a big empire. It has historically been a big empire, a big state, very influential. So they do have, of course, some legitimate concerns. But through open talk, this could have been dealt far better. So, basically speaking, I agree with you. And with the red line, from our point of view, the Syrian crisis had been first and foremost a humanitarian crisis. And the red line means that if you are the frog in the boiling water, you have to tell that this is the centigrade that I will allow you to come. If you use chemical weapons and hundreds of children die in front of your eyes and you do nothing. This is shame. There have been other instances, you can start with the old Egyptians, Spartans, whatever you like. World has not been a place where justice had been served fully. But at this hour in 2013, 2014, if a leader, I think he used it, who else would have used it? I mean, the rebels don't have access to chemical weapons. Anyway, but I agree in the sense that we should be much more wholesome in responding to crisis. With the gentleman's question, of course, again, this has been a humanitarian crisis from our point of view. Political, secondary. It has become humanitarian because it's political, there is an intermingling, but for us, it is the humanitarian crisis, the displacement of persons, the killing of 150,000 Syrian nationals. Well, if there is an election, or there is not an election, whatever, and if the Kurds in adjoining territories declare their independence, what we will do, firstly, you just don't go and declare your independence. This is a whole process. There is a Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, as you would know, since 1974, rather 1983. It has not been recognized. So if the Fenerbahce supporters in your vicinity are somewhat in preponderance in, say, Nene Hatun Caddesi, there are 75 Fenerbahce supporters as opposed to 12 Galatasaray supporters, then they don't go and declare a Fenerbahce Republic. Having a preponderance in a certain region is not the clear route for independence. And they have to, I suppose, coordinate their action with the Kurds in Iraq, with the Kurds in Iran, whatever. It's a much more complicated process than seemed to us.
Short answers, please.
To Russians' interests or questions, I don't agree simply because we have looked at the NATO Council and the EU has labeled Russia as a strategic partner. So there was a will and even kind of favorable because they were trying to engage Russia. The question for me is, was Russia really willing to engage us? So that would be my reply on that. NATO enlargement, well again, I don't think, I'm sure, to be a bit more correct, that NATO enlargement was nothing against Russia. It was not about Russia. It was about the kind of enlarging the prosperity and stability in Europe, given the difficulties we have faced in our history in Europe. Well, I guess that was the main goal. And NATO, in the end, proved to be quite useful out of the area. I do think that Russia has to appreciate the role of NATO. It has played, for example, in Afghanistan. It was nothing about to do with Russia, or it has nothing to do with Russia. And NATO is not seeing Russia as an adversary. As for Russia, well, I'm not sure. If you look into the conceptual documents of Russia, they do identify NATO as a clear adversary of Russia. That is, just to be clear. The UN system was just a statement of obvious. I was not drawing any conclusions of that. I just said that I do see similarities, failure of the UN system, and there are many other failures, as you know. Syria and kind of an implication for the Ukrainian crisis. I would argue that it was maybe our inability or failure to react in a more decisive way to the crisis in Georgia and Ukraine as another consequences of crisis in Georgia. EU Parliament, a new kind of a setup of the Parliament. I do not think that we will see many consequences, major changes in our policies. It very much depends, of course, on who is going to be elected as the new high representative, because we might see different accents, we might see more energy on the Ukraine policy side, we might see some interesting agendas on the table, but I do not think that we are going to face major policy shift.
customers from here.
Just to follow what my Czech predecessor mentioned about the Western-Russian relationship, I very much agreed with him that we did almost everything short of making President Putin the head of the Commission. We admitted Russia to WTO, we admitted Russia to OSCE. There is a NATO Russia Council. There are special mechanisms to have a dialogue with Russia in the EU. So what else could have been done to bring Russia closer to the international community? I don't know. I really do not know. And my country, Poland, was trying to do everything possible to have a proper relationship with Russia for the last 25 years. But repeatedly Russia was refusing that. And they were using energy, blocking the export of our meat, just recently in the last couple of years, using that as a strategic, as a geopolitical instrument. And let me just go back to one issue you mentioned about BP. Sorry to go back to this issue, but it's very critical. It's true that BP came to Petersburg, but there were others. Siemens, ExxonMobil, and many other international Western companies who didn't show up. So we can use that the glass that is half empty or half full. And one more thing about Ukraine and NATO. I didn't mention that before, but I would like to praise the Ukrainian military. I had a great privilege to serve with the Ukrainians in Iraq when I was a political advisor to the commander of multinational division Central South in Babylon. And the Ukrainians were already there with us, and during the Ukrainian crisis, we saw that the Ukrainian military acted like a NATO military. They were not involved in a political game. They didn't went into the streets and shoot the civilians. So at the moment, it doesn't really matter whether Ukraine will join NATO in 10, 5, 20, 8, even never. But Ukrainian military is already having some NATO standards, some Western standards. So that's what really important. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'd like to thank all of the participants and also SETA for bringing us together. And I hope it was a useful debate for all of us. And thank you very much for your time.